Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement, episode number unknown. This will go live sometime in the near future. My name is Colin Moriarty. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, someone I had become acquainted with on Twitter, started following, and wanted on the show for many reasons. He was nice enough to agree. His name is Gene Park from the Washington Post. Gene, how are you, my friend?
Not bad, actually. It's Friday. I've been sick for the past several months. I got COVID in December, and I've been feeling well since. But I have my up and down days, and fortunately, today is a good day for Sacred Symbols Plus. So, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you letting me chat with you and your audience, and it's a real pleasure to make your acquaintance.
Yeah, thank you. And you've tweeted out about it for anyone that knows you or follows you there. I've learned a lot about it from following you, is that you have the dreaded long COVID or this lingering effect of it. So I'm really sorry to hear that. It seems like it's affecting so many people.
It sucks. It's just I don't know if I still haven't really been able to see a specialist. So I don't know if it activated something else within me or whatever, but I got COVID and I've been sick ever since.
Yeah. So. I'm truly sorry to hear that. And we'll be mindful of that as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So I was reading about you, Gene, and I became familiar with you on Twitter and started kind of reading some of the stuff over at the Washington Post, the launcher sub channel or whatever over there, which is it's washingtonpost.com/video-games. I have it up
or
right now.
launcher.gg if you just want to just be clever and cute with
or if you want to be like a modern adult, unlike me. And in reading about you, because I had just become familiar with you when you started writing about games at the Washington Post, because I actually think you were there for longer. But
yes,
for me, I was examining things and I'm like, I don't know who this person is. Like, I've been writing about games for about 20 years and I'm like, I've never heard of this guy. And then I realized in reading about you that you kind of come from the outside. And this is why I think you're so intriguing. Because I think you have an open mind. You must have a more open mind than many of us who have been entrenched in this and kind of have our preconceived notions about games coverage and games journalism and games criticism. But you also have a really interesting education. You, like me, first of all, you went to Cal State Fullerton, and you don't have a journalism degree, and I don't have a journalism degree either. I went to Northeastern for history. What I'm interested with you is that you have a marketing and PR background and actually worked in that field a little bit too. So I think you bring a lot to bear, which I'm excited to explore. So I was curious if you could just give us a little bit of your background and how you came to this point.
Yeah, you did a really good background check. I don't have to explain too much. Really, I got into I don't know. Should I start from how I got into journalism? You think?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing. My full name is John Eugene Park. My Christian name is John. Eugene was named from my mother, who was a huge fan of American writing, and she wanted to give me the name of America's greatest playwright, Eugene O'Neill. So that's where the Gene comes from, in the Gene Park. And so, it was always kind of like predetermined that I would probably enjoy writing in some form. And then, so I did a lot of creative writing when I was younger. And then so I grew up on Guam, the U.S. territory in the Pacific Islands, just like 3 hours south of Japan, and around the same time zone as Sydney, Australia. And the local newspaper, a Gannett newspaper there, had an internship. And when I was about 15 or 16, she said, "Hey, you like writing? There's an internship. Why don't you, go figure out your future and maybe see if this is for you?" And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So I applied to the internship. I got it. It was unpaid at the time. This is during 1995, 96. So, unpaid child labor is totally cool back then. And I did that for about a year, and then they started paying us, which is nice. They started paying us the federal minimum wage, which was like $5 back then. Like $5.75. And after about a year, I was like, yeah, I kind of like it. I always enjoyed creative writing, so journalistic writing, interviewing people was really hard for me. Growing up, I was very much a very shy guy who always looked at the ground as if the ground was going to fall away from him. So finding this courage to have to just walk up to people and talk to them was a skill that I was developing and I was enjoying. Um, and I started to realize, maybe I'm pretty good at this. So, you did say that I don't have a degree in journalism, but I do have a degree in communications
Right.
with an emphasis on journalism.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
yeah. So I did start.
My research wasn't deep enough.
Yeah, there you go. But I just put communications there because like who gives a fuck, right? So
Right. That's true. It's like,
and I don't want to let people know. Oh yeah, I studied journalism all my life. That's just not something that I just take pride in myself or whatever.
Sure. Understood.
But I did go to Cal State Fullerton in '99 to 2003 with focusing on journalism, but definitely with a communications background. But I worked for the school paper there, and I lived in Orange County for several years during that time. I interned at the Orange County Register, the San Gabriel Valley Tribune. None of this had to do anything to do with video games. That whole time, I'm just like playing video games. During high school, I didn't even play video games for a while. Like I didn't even know Resident Evil 2 came out until like a year and a half later. So like during the PlayStation 1 era, there was like a half where I wasn't like really engaged in games for a while. In college, obviously, I got really back into games with PlayStation 2 and N64 and all that. But I never covered games. It was always straight journalism. And so I finished school and I couldn't get a job in California. I was not technically homeless, but I lived in my friend's garage for about 6 months before I realized I can't get a job here in California. So I guess I'm moving back to Guam, which is not something I wanted to do. But I did. I ended up working back for the same Gannett paper that I interned at, and they did accept me. And I ended up working there for about 3 years. At 3 years back home in my hometown, I started to feel like Bruce Springsteen and wanted to get out of the hometown. So I felt like I was born and run. So I met a girl, fell in love. She lived in Hawaii, so I moved to Hawaii to be with her. Things didn't work out, but fortunately, I did go to Hawaii with the promise of a job. I didn't get the job, so I ended up working for the smaller newspaper. Honolulu was one of the rare towns which still had two major newspapers, and I worked for the smaller one. And I worked there for about 2.5 years until 2009 when I got laid off. And just to give people background on what I mostly covered crime, local crime. I covered that mostly on Guam until I covered some military movements as well as small business. And then on Hawaii, I covered mostly crime, local crime, local public safety stuff. And then in 2009, I got laid off during the recession. And then I worked in health insurance for about 11 months and, tried to understand health insurance during that whole time. I never really understood it, but I worked in online customer service at the time, and I was helping out with that effort. And then the paper hired me back. And so I got hired back as a business reporter, and then after that, after about a year or so, I really wanted to switch to covering, or not covering, but specializing myself in social media, because as I was a cops reporter, I was using Twitter and social media very, very often. I was the first reporter in Honolulu to start reporting on crimes as they were happening. Like, hey, or like, public safety issues, like, hey, the freeway is backed up. I'm right here. The cops are going to be here for like an hour or two. So just watch out. So people would be like, hey, follow Gene. He's got all the traffic updates, or he's finding out about that murder down south or whatever. So that's how I kind of started to grow my social media following by just reporting live on crime. And I really started to kind of understand how social media and the internet was really changing the game on how information spread. And this is something I understood in high school, and we can talk about that more later. But eventually, then I asked if I can switch to more like digital type roles. And then they stuck me in some online production role that really wasn't anything to do with social media or audience engagement. So then I quit, and then I decided journalism was dead. I was like, the news is not going anywhere. This whole industry is just totally fucked, right? So that's why I was like, you know what, I'm just going to quit and go into PR marketing, because I really want to move out of Hawaii, and like I love to move out to California. That was really my goal. And if I do PR marketing, then that would diversify my skill set, and I can more easily jump into any company. So I did that for about a year, until Pierre Midyar, the founder of eBay and the founder of The Intercept, and he also ran a small nonprofit investigative journalism outfit in Hawaii called Civil Beat. They contacted me and said, hey, Gene, we heard you're actually the best in social media in Hawaii. Like, we need like an audience engagement editor like here. And I was like, great, that's the first one in Hawaii ever. For people who don't know, audience editors are basically people who work a lot in social media, but also try to help reporters find like the audience for the stories. It's just kind of like the real short of it. I can go into more detail if
something that CNN
later.
Plus might have been able to use.
Exactly. So like if I was an audience editor at CNN and CNN asked me, hey, we got this newfangled idea for charging people for things that are not actually CNN, but Rex Chapman or whoever just talking about life or whatever, I would be like, I don't know. There's a huge audience for that.
Yeah, and he would have been right.
Yeah. For people who don't know, CNN Plus shut down after like 18 days of being in service.
Yeah,
so.
really embarrassing stuff, and
so
really obvious as well, which is exactly what you're talking about. But go on, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, it's a good interlude, and a very very relevant one. So I did it. I accepted the job at Silverbeat. I was like, hey, maybe this is a chance. Maybe if I do a good job at this small outfit, then I can somehow convince a legacy outlet to hire me, if not as a reporter, because I don't think I'm like the best reporter. I really don't. I understand my limits as a journalist, but I do understood my limits as an audience engagement person, as a social media person. I knew that I excelled in that better than I did in just regular on the boots reporting. So I knew if I did a good job here at Silverbeat, then maybe the LA Times, which was my ideal outfit at the time, because again, I wanted to move back to California, would hire me. And about a year and a half of doing that, I saw the opening at the Washington Post. I didn't really know anyone there, so I just applied, and they called. I didn't get the job, and then they had another job. I applied again, and then they called back and said, "Hey, we like to interview you." And then it's a 3-month interview process, and then I found out in 2015 that I'm moving to Washington D.C. So I moved to Washington D.C., got hired at the Washington Post in 2015 as an audience editor. I joined the audience team. This was after Jeff Bezos had bought out the paper in 2013. So I was kind of like part of a new initiative of new younger hires, even though I was already 35 at the time when I got hired. I was actually the oldest member of our social media team. I was older than my bosses and everything.
Interesting.
And then I did that for about 5 years. And then in 2019, the Washington Post had a keen interest in covering esports. Local investors here in DC are Teliotis, you may know him. One of the founders of AOL have been investing a lot into esports. So that was something that they were really interested in covering. And then so of course they tapped me, the gamer guy, to kind of like advise on this new section. And as I was at the Washington Post, I also started writing some articles too, because I really wanted to just kind of showcase my talent. Like, hey guys, I know how to write too. I don't know how to just write tweets and like strategize Facebook like strategy or whatever like that. I can write too. So eventually all of that work kind of led up to like, hey, we should just give Gene the games journalist job. Like, he already works here and he's doing a great job advising for us, and he seems to know a lot about the industry.
Good stuff.
And that's kind of how I fell into the job. So I've never been into games journalism. Colin, I had never even heard about you before.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, like a couple months ago too. So like, because like I'm not like in the games journalism world. Like, I don't know like the personalities all that well. Like when Giant Bomb like went down, like I felt so out of the loop, because like everybody had like this wonderful, beautiful thing to say about Giant Bomb. And it's like I totally missed the Giant Bomb age. So it's like they sound like great people. And I watched some old clips and I was like, yeah, that shit is really funny. Like I can totally see why people liked it. But it's like I missed out on that nostalgia because I didn't get it. But yeah, I joined in 2019 and the pandemic hit, and I've been here ever since. So
yeah, I think it's awesome to hear this extensive history, because I think that labyrinthine path you took to this point is valuable. I'm glad that the Washington Post, at least initially, didn't go and say like, we want to go and poach someone from Polygon or something. I think it's good to have someone with a harder news background, with a different sort of background that can generate interest. And I'm surprised that it's taken newspapers like the Post and the Times and others so long
Mm-hmm.
to get to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that they've gone far enough. But I've been reading Launcher, and to your point about esports, it's one of the 4 things on the vertical. It's news, reviews, tips, which I thought was interesting. SEO scraping, certainly, which is fine. And then esports. But I wonder, what is your charge at the Washington Post for whatever managing editor you might report to or whatever? Like, what do they expect out of Launcher, and what do they expect out of Gene Park? Because you can't do a comprehensive IGN style coverage of games. That's not what Washington Post wants, nor do you have the manpower to do that. You can't do something like Last Stand that's irreverent and well, it could be irreverent, but it's whatever we want it to be. We don't really have to do anything. We just do what we feel like our audience wants. You have this interesting lane where the Washington Post is this legacy piece of legacy newspaper, the second most, I think, subscribed newspaper in the United States, and 3 million subscribers, I think, something like that, which is awesome. I mean, a rare success story and what I would consider a dying legacy media landscape, maybe only with the New York Times and a few others.
Absolutely.
So what's the intent? I guess I should say. How would you answer that question?
I think the intent is first recognizing that video games is a cultural force, and we're obviously very late. And the legacy media is obviously extremely late in this. I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think even with me there, even if I were going to boast my own standing in the Washington Post or in mainstream media, I think we're too late. I think for me, even this appearance on the show, Sacred Symbols Plus, I look at it as you giving me a platform and not like the other way around or anything like that. Because for me, the power imbalance in terms of audience is with you guys, with creators, with independent creators who are leading this charge and who are leading the conversation and who are leading the engagement and the culture around this. I look at part of my job as at least trying to engage in that also, and also trying to, kind of showcase that the Washington Post at least is beginning to understand this and is well aware of this and it treats it seriously. It's obviously we want more readers, right? But I do think it's part of it is about making our coverage more well-rounded. And the Washington Post is primarily known so heavily on just politics. When I was an audience engagement editor, I would do things like try to promote our Super Bowl package. So like again, as a social media editor, I'm just going to say social media editor, so audience editor doesn't fuck people up. As a social media editor, I was always like trying to promote like various different like aspects of our Washington Post journalism. So I'll work with a sports section, which I'm under now actually, because we were initially going to cover esports. But like we have a great package on how fast the baseball goes or our Super Bowl coverage, and then people on Reddit would respond like, "I didn't know the Washington Post covered the Super Bowl. I thought you guys only covered politics." I was like, "Yeah, we got a sports section, man. Like we're gonna cover sports. We got the Nats. We got local teams here to cover. So we're gonna cover them." And so like, but even with that, like, even when people who would know our coverage still don't really know like how deep we can go in certain coverage. So that's kind of like where we're at, where the Washington Post is really trying to diversify its coverage set and saying that we're trying to cover the totality of life. And that's where also video games come in. I was very much pushing the view that video games were not only the mainstream culture of entertainment today, outside of like hip hop and like film or video, but like it's going to be the future, which informed a lot of my reporting on the metaverse and Epic Games, where it's like, I started reporting on the metaverse like a year and a half before Facebook started covering it. That's because I feel like the video games are really going to be key towards, how we interact online in the future. And that it's kind of like a convergence of like my two professional interests right now, where it's video games and also social media or audience, right? Where I'm thinking about where the audience is going, where the audience is, where the audience will be in the future. And it's going to be in games. It's going to be in more interactive type mediums. And I like at the very least, covering video games at the Washington Post is a good first step in helping the Washington Post understand where games lay in the future landscape. I
I
hope
was
that's clear. I
no,
hope that
well, it
is.
totally is. It's
Yeah,
perfectly clear, and I have a follow up, which is, I was senior editor at IGN for a long time back in the day, and obviously we have an enthusiast relationship with PR, marketing, and all of this, right? They want to
sure.
deal with us because they, we're reviewing their games, we're covering their press releases, and all of this. I feel like that era is kind of dying or dead. And in this new era, I'm wondering. Well, let me back up and say that I've noticed I cover PlayStation professionally, right? Sony is very interested in talking to Wired and
Mhm,
GQ, and that's
mhm.
it. And you can
Yeah.
tell, right? That what 5 years ago they would have had no interest in talking to those outlets. They would have much rather talk to IGN. I'm wondering how publishers and developers and all of the powers that be, the first parties, how have they received Washington Post? Are they eager to work with you to provide games or to provide access for interviews and all of this? Because I feel like on the other side of this could be a really great opportunity for publishers and developers to get their games taken more seriously. It's not just a
Mhm,
matter of us taking them seriously, but them saying like we have an adult or a more sophisticated product, and the Washington Post might be our outlet to a more sophisticated audience. So
mhm.
how would you answer that?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you mentioned Wired and GQ because I've also noticed that too. Wired, got like the PS5 exclusive, right?
Right.
And then Jim Ryan fucking loves GQ, man.
Yeah, there's something about that they love. They must just love bringing that into the boardroom or something. I don't know.
I think so, man. Look. Like when I was growing up, my dad subscribed to GQ, and then like he wouldn't give me like the Berenstain Bears and shit to read. He would give me copies of GQ, and he'd be like, "Here, be a real man. Like read this shit, right?" So like I had to like learn how to like be a dapper man and dress, and like I figured out how to like figure out like my best cologne scent by rubbing my 7-year old hand on like the pages of
Wow, look at
GQ
you.
or whatever. So I get the mystique of GQ, and I think Jim Ryan totally reminds me of my dad. And then so like if I see like my dad would fucking would kill to be in GQ, and I think that like Jim Ryan loves that too.
Yeah,
um
totally.
and to add to that, Jim Ryan also likes to be in the Washington Post. When Sony does offer it to us, they would say, hey, we're only offering a few outlets to announce, like PSVR two. He talked about PSVR two with us. We were one of the first,
Right.
and then I would notice that he would also talk to Wired and GQ at the same time. So I'm like, okay, well, I think we're kind of elevating into that Wired and
Yes.
GQ tier of like the Jim Ryan interest or whatever. Doug Bowser of Nintendo would reach out too. After Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard, Phil Spencer reached out, and this was during like the height of like my illness. So like I really had to work around like they really had to work around my schedule, where it's like, hey guys, I'm not really feeling well. Sorry, Phil.
Right.
So I really want to talk about this, and then we did, and then it did, and that story did really well. But it really does feel like that some companies are finding that, hey, this is a really nice space where we can kind of like talk a little bit deeper about our products or our plans in a broader range than just to the enthusiast press, and in a way to make them feel like they're important companies, right?
Totally. I mean, because I think that's the fine unspoken balance, at least in my experience in enthusiast journalism, is like you can't. People want you to really body entities and like really take them to the mat all the time and really like just call them out and all this. And I'm like, no, like you have a little bit more of a realistic long view on what companies are doing and also managing those relationships in such a way that you're not burning bridges or being unfair. And I think it's actually the fairness that these companies care most about is not necessarily the positive or negative reaction, but the fairness. I know.
Absolutely.
I know that when trophies and especially achievements came to Xbox, that was when a lot of journalists started getting nailed by publishers being like, you didn't play the game.
Hmm.
Like we know you didn't play the game when you reviewed it. We know, like, et cetera and so on. And started keeping people honest. I think there's got to be more mechanisms in place for that, and they'll be more comfortable. But I wonder, again, with an outsider's view, this kind of specialist view on audience retention and finding new audiences. I've been in the industry long enough to see the game websites destroy magazines, and then
Hmm.
YouTube, Twitch, podcast, Patreon destroy the websites.
Hmm.
Um, What do you think has gone wrong here? Do you think it's just character? In other words, do you think it's just the people that are kind of peeling off and taking these audiences, or do you think that something has been lost in the soul of some of these outlets? I know you weren't familiar with all of them, but it
Hmm.
seems like there is no respect for these outlets anymore. And I think 10 years ago, there was quite a bit of it. So I'm wondering if you think something has changed and if you think that that might be endemic to all journalism, because I feel like it's not just us. I think it's everyone.
It's
Um,
everyone. It's
yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
I absolutely believe that what like any institutional any institution these days is at risk. Look at the times that we're living in today, right? Everyone hates every institution, even including the Washington Post.
Yep.
That we're an institution. So I absolutely do think that it's not even endemic in games journalism. I think that the internet and the creator-led revolution has definitely kind of changed the dynamics of power and influence. And one thing I truly believe is I think legacy media, especially legacy media, still don't understand that. And they still believe that they hold so much influence and power. I mean, they're still fucking making editorials about endorsing presidents,
Right.
and it's like that never does anything, But it's like what is the mindset to think that anyone actually cares about what a bunch of like 10 old white people think about like who should be president, Nobody cares about that.
Right. If it
Um,
mattered, then 2016 Hillary would have overwhelmingly won.
Exactly. Then she would have blown away everything,
Right. Exactly.
because like Trump won like one editorial like thing, so endorsement. So like that doesn't matter. It's on paper that it doesn't matter. And legacy outlets don't understand that, and they're not really doing anything to change that dynamic. I do think that a lot of it is personality based. I do think that people who are looking to people are looking for people to trust. Um, and I don't know what happened. Well, I there's so many different things that happen to make people mistrust journalism. So many little things, and I don't think it's just one thing that broke it. I just think that there's just so many different factors, so many little incidents that kind of compound and add up to it. Um, Even people will always remember the Washington Post. Leftists will always hate the Washington Post for the one day where we had 17 anti-Bernie articles. And any leftist will tell you that they fucking remember this day because I hear it all the goddamn time. And I always have to tell them, okay, it's 17 articles. 4 of them was after debate where he didn't do really well, and then like the other 13 were like all op-eds were and clearly a lot of our op-ed writers are anti-Bernie, so they saw that chance and jumped on it. So yeah, that's kind of what happened. But it was just a bad day for Bernie. That's all. But leftists will forever remember that. Just like I remember when IGN gave God Hand a 3.0,
Yeah. Chris Roper. Yeah.
and like look I love IGN. I love IGN. I'm not saying that people should forever like rag on IGN for giving God Hand 3.0, but if I was a more maybe I don't want to say irrational, but if I was an angrier person, or if I was a person who held a grudge more, I mean, I still remember that, and I'm still pretty salty about it. I'm not holding a grudge against IGN about it, but I'm still salty
Sure.
about it because the Godhand could have gotten 8.9 or 9.0, and then we could have more Godhand clones as opposed to whatever the fuck we got now.
Yeah.
So you know,
No, but well said. I mean, yeah, that is a notorious review. Chris Roper wrote that review, who works at PlayStation now, but he was the founder of Podcast Beyond, which was my first show. So a funny little connection there. But yeah, that we made fun of him internally for that, by the way,
there
too.
you go. See, yeah,
And people made fun of me for some of my reviews as well. But I wonder, with that, all of that said, what do you think the major goals should be? Like, what are some of the beacons, like the klaxons that are kind of ringing right now for you in the games industry that merit more coverage? I see one of your writers, I think her name's Shannon Lau. Is that
hmm
right? Um,
hmm
she seems to have the right idea with some of the things she's writing, in my opinion, with holding powerful people to account, which I think
yeah,
is,
it's
is
great.
an important part of journalism.
hmm
Um, And I know it's actually quite controversial at your newspaper now because some people are wondering, like, well, what does the term powerful mean? And I know Taylor Lorenz and all that stuff, people are wondering, like, well, does power mean institutional power? Does power mean political power, social power, et cetera? And so
Absolutely.
it's an open question. But I feel like one of the things that I'm concerned that's not being reported on more, and it's something that we scream loudly about on our coverage and are proud of because I think we are setting kind of the tone for it, is the games industry's rampant abuse in China of just raking money out of that place and just kind of turning a blind eye to everything that's going on there. And more recently, SNK being purchased by basically the Saudi royal family,
Hmm.
which I am majorly concerned about. And I've been concerned about Saudi Arabia since I knew anything about politics. It's just
Hmm.
so I feel like there are these loud things that people don't want to pay attention to or don't want to write about. Maybe it's a little difficult. It's a little out of people's wheelhouse. I totally get that. Maybe I
Hmm.
have a better, or you have a better understanding of it because of our journalistic backgrounds or my history and political background in school. I
Hmm.
don't know what it is, but I feel like I want to see more of that kind of coverage because I feel like we're almost missing holding to account the most powerful people. It's easy to say, let's hold Bobby Kotick to account. We have him dead to rights on XYZ with Activision, but it's like, well, what about Sony manufacturing PlayStations in China? I mean,
Hmm.
that alone, while necessary, and we always say on our show, it's impossible to live a moral economic life, but it's because of these powerful corporations. It's not because of our want to not live that moral economic life. So I've said a lot here, but what kind of what kind of draws you these days? What do you think needs to be covered in our industry?
Yeah, I think like the Asian market is something that I've definitely wanted to cover more of in recent years, and I just haven't been able to because I've like now that I've been in games journalism, there's so much churn in terms of news, in terms of traffic and everything, that you have to focus on so many different things. Um, I do think that you kind of touched on it, where it's like it might somehow kind of be on someone's wheelhouse, outside of someone's wheelhouse. Like I think I would need to do a lot of prep if I was to cover more of like SNK's involvement and the Saudi government. The Saudi government murdered one of my colleagues,
Yep.
Jamal Khashoggi.
Awful. Awful.
So that there's already an inherent antagonistic relationship there. So I do think that a lot of it is resources. The games industry is so large already, and I think games journalism seems to be trying to redefine itself. And I think that's why you see sites like IGN kind of like and GameSpot like tiptoeing into the kinds of coverage that Kotaku and Polygon have done over the years. Um, and I think that's where a lot of the trust with creators have went, because a lot of creators, and obviously influencers take a lot of money from companies too, but there are also a lot of independent creators, podcasters who do constantly rail about like consumer like anti-consumer practices, mostly here in North America, right? And have been beating that drum for a long time, and I think that has earned the trust of a lot of people in the audience, because that's what people are talking about. That's what people care about. um, I don't know if there's a North Star for games journalism to reach. I think right now, I think there is. I think in journalism overall, I think there is a crisis of like who do we want to be? Do we want to be stayed, both sides, or seeing all sides, like kind of like emotionally detached journalism, or do we want something a little bit more passionate? I think that right now you see so much of that in the kind of coverage that we have, where people are really inserting a lot of themselves into the coverage, or a lot of the world their own views on what's good and bad. And so I think right now games journalism is kind of going through a growing pains right now. And I do see the Washington Post as kind of part of that. Shannon, for example, I don't want to talk too much about my colleagues, but Shannon loves to do business reporting, so she's definitely covering a lot of the. I'm glad that you find her coverage great. She's a great colleague, and that's just something that she's interested in too. I'm more interested in like the I wanted to get into journalism because I wanted to cover rock criticism. I wanted to hang out with hip hop groups and
Right.
and find out like how they're feeling about the music scene. Um, That never happened once in my entire life. But it's cool to do that in game journalism. I get to hang out with creators in games and talk with games, and like to me, that kind of feels like the Greenwich Village of the 1960s back in the day,
Yeah, well said.
or like Brooklyn or the Bronx back in the 1980s when all the DJs and rappers were getting together. Like I feel like we're kind of on the cusp, or like at the beginning of like some kind of like larger cultural movement, and it's nice to kind of be part of that. Like even making friends with creators. I'm definitely friends with creators, and that's not something that I'm afraid to do. And that's one thing. That's one avenue that I've been interested in doing, where it's like, legacy media and the creator space has been very, very like I'm like they're trying to like look at it from like a distance, like an archaeological thing, where it's like, look at these influencers and creators and look at how much money they make and everything like that. And it's like, no, well, why don't we just recognize them as the important part of the culture, and why don't we discuss with them and talk with them and meet with them on the terms that they're on, because they're leading the conversation right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, again, I brought up CNN Plus earlier. I think a lot of people look at it and are like, man, how can you be so wrong, right? Like, how can you just be so detached from reality? I
Hmm.
have almost 13,000 subscribers that pay that subscription fee every month, and we do it out of our house, right? There are CNN spends $300 million and can't get 150,000.
Yeah,
That's just that's there's a dissonance there.
with
But
10,000 viewers a day,
yeah, awful.
like
It's
not
awful.
even the subscription. Like I'm surprised that they even got that many subscriptions. But
Me too.
but like even with that paying audience, you couldn't even get like a tenth of them.
It's just it's I just think that, and it goes into all the McKinsey stuff and all the stuff that they pay for analysts and all this. But I wanted to touch on something you said earlier, which is, like, what is wrong? There are so many things wrong leading up to how we've kind of come to this point in journalism. And I think you had kind of touched on something, which was this both sidesism, or this idea of kind of coverage from multiple angles.
Hmm.
Um, I think that actually is a big piece of it, in my opinion, and maybe a big piece of my own success,
Hmm.
is that I'm a willing participant in the culture war from a different perspective, and I'm willing to back it up. Like, I'm not a shrinking violet in any way. I think everyone knows that about me.
I, I,
Uh,
I've read up on you
yeah.
in the past few weeks, so yeah, so I've learned that too. So
And I feel like it's not, you can agree or disagree with me, but I think I tell people all the time, it's like, I don't think I'm particularly talented. I think I just sound different than a lot
Mhm.
of people. And I'm curious how you feel, I guess, more deeply about this idea of getting different voices. Like, I see that you guys have more recently a guy like Nathan Grayson, who used to work at Kotaku. I have serious personal beef with him, so I'm not going to get into that, but it surprises me to get someone like that, a culture warrior, and not try to balance it out with a different kind of culture warrior. Do you think that there is value in that? Because I think that that is part of the equation. I feel like people look at things and say, like, it always seems to go in one direction, doesn't it? Like, the Hogwarts Legacy stuff always seems to go in one direction. The
Mhm.
Activision Blizzard coverage always assumes guilt. Et cetera and so on. Like, where is, even stuff with a real inflection point for me was just the absolute disrespect shown Nolan Bushnell by GDC over accusations that he was like a sexual predator in the 70s, that everyone that worked for him said, like, that's just outrageous.
I
And everyone's
remember
like,
that.
no, Nolan Bushnell's out. I feel like people look at that and are like, there's just a series of unfair things always happening in one direction. And it seems like people kind of protect themselves, and they hire themselves. And if I were looking at the situation, like, I would look for people like me, not because I'm good, but because it's
Mhm.
just like, well, it's just a little different. And there are people
Mhm.
that want to hear a more conservative angle, or whatever the case might be. So do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree and disagree with it. I agree with it. I disagree with it because I do think that there are quite a bit of conservative people working in mainstream media already, including the Washington Post. I don't know if you read our editorials, but we're definitely a very center of left, center of right sometimes.
I
Um,
should be specific that I'm talking more about just games coverage generally, but yes, I do know that the Washington Post has I like the Washington Post much more than I like many of the other legacy newspapers, to
Well,
be fair.
thank you. I appreciate that, and we appreciate that. I do think that it does speak to a bigger issue of like we are hiring what we know, And I don't think that it's the reason why I kind of broaden it out to regular journalism is because I don't think it's endemic to just game journalism. I think like liberals are hiring liberals. Liberals are hiring their friends. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think it gets any more complicated than that. You know. I'll give you one example that you might relate to, where I was in a training for a broad variety of journalists, right? I won't tell you exactly where, but it was just a number of journalists, and it was training for weapons, learning how to cover weapons in your news coverage. And the reporter was a prior service military, and he asked a question: how many of you here in the room have shot a gun before? And it was just me and I want to say 4 other people, and I'm even being generous in that. I swear to God, it was only like one other person. I'm the kind of person to sit in the back, so I really only saw like one other person, and one other person raised their hand. And that was when I realized, wow, this was like my first entry into like meeting other national journalists. And I was like, wow, there's just a lot of people who just never shot a gun before. That's crazy to me,
Yeah,
like,
it is crazy.
because I grew up with guns, my grandfather was sheriff, so I learned how to shoot when I was 6. So like for me to meet other journalists who are interested in covering crime and weapons, don't understand weapons at all, really showcased to me like I don't know if we're really hiring like like diversely. Like I'm not even talking about like ethnicity or whatever, but like in terms of like thought or experience or social political background.
Right, like real diversity, as I always call it. I mean, that's where a lot of people get mad at me, but I'm like, that's diversity, right?
Yeah.
Having a Trump voter, an evangelical, an atheist, a socialist, and a soccer mom on a staff,
Mm-hmm.
that's true diversity to me. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I wouldn't call it true diversity, but I would definitely call it diversity. Like I would not deny it as diversity, because I do think that diversity of thought, diversity of background is important. Look at the New York Times, their new editor Joe Kahn, who from everything I've heard of him, he's an excellent journalist and a very sharp journalist mind, but he's also rich as fuck. He's the heir to the Staples fortune. He grew up in a background where he never not lived in a mansion, and he never had millions of dollars to back him up. So and he's quite liberal, but also the very much into both sides journalism part. But again, there's no diversity there, because the New York Times leadership has always been very rich and very privileged. And then so now the next leadership of the New York Times, this is like a kingship, where he's going to be the editor of the New York Times for whenever he decides. It's like being Pope,
Right.
And he's like, we're just gonna have another extremely rich guy leading the charge on how journalism is going to be covered, because like it or not, everyone follows the example of the New York Times. The Washington Post does, every local newspaper does, and they're going to follow that lead. So again, there's really no diversity of thought, because there's a continuance of like, oh well, they graduated from Northwestern, or they graduated from Yale. I like to joke around at the Washington Post. I like to call it the Harvard Faculty Lounge, because I want to say that I'm one of the few people who graduated from state school. But like whenever I find someone who graduated from state college, like I'm always like, hey, cool, like we got off with 0 student loans.
Right.
Like how fucking smart are we, right? Like
Yeah, how lucky, moreover,
yeah, how
are
lucky,
you?
because like I went to Cal State Fullerton, and like it was cheap there,
And now you're not writing articles about how the government should forgive your student loans. But
Yeah,
but
because
I
I'm
digress.
not personally invested in that. I do think that the government might need to cover student loans, but I went to state school, and I ended up in the same places as these motherfuckers. So like I personally take a lot of pride in that. Where it's like, I went to state school. I just got a bachelor's degree. I never went to graduate school, and I'm still in the same place as you guys. And I'm rare, you know.
Yeah,
Even when I
owned.
went back to Cal State Fullerton, my professors introduced me as like, yeah, you don't really see a lot of us make it to the Washington Post. So here's Gene.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, congratulations. I mean, that's good stuff. And
Yeah.
I think you will find the feedback from the audience very positive on this from my audience, because especially because you just gave you gave a very candid answer, which is so obvious and manifest to everyone around you, but people can't admit it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had candid conversations with my old bosses at IGN where I'm like, don't you want, I was privy to the fact that I was still in the top 10 writers at IGN years after I left by traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, doesn't that tell you that you should just go find someone that's going to write from a more conservative angle? But they're so cowed by their own staffs. And I think you've kind of gotten that around. In fact, I was told explicitly that I'm not even welcome at IGN's office anymore when I wanted to go record a podcast there or whatever a couple of years ago. So it's totally different breed,
Mm-hmm.
which is so strange. Meanwhile, I was much more important to IGN than any of the people that are working there, with rare exception now. But I digress. You had brought up kind of having a rich benefactor, and I did want to ask you about Jeff Bezos. I don't look at this ownership as sinisterly,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, as a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily like or dislike Jeff Bezos. I happen to be a big Amazon guy. I love Amazon. Oh my God, who doesn't love Amazon? But
Sure, yeah. They're basically utility. Yeah.
right, exactly. Their freaking trucks are driving around my neighborhood all day.
Yeah.
But does this matter? I mean, would it be preferable for you to have a different ownership structure outside of him? Because I know you said you came in afterwards. It was obviously very dramatic when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like when you look at what he paid for it, it was like a fucking steal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that it kind of saved a really important newspaper that did a lot of really important work. I'm one of the guys that thinks journalism is broken, but I don't necessarily think we benefit from just destroying everything. I think we have to destroy a lot. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think the Washington Post is one of those things that really should be destroyed. So I'm curious, you were talking about, and it's different because you were talking about a person in the editorial structure coming from a rich background. This is different than having an ownership or a
Of
benefactor,
course, of course.
an oligarch, basically. But does this bother you, or does this come into factor to you at all?
Um, we were lucky that a union was already in place a long time before Bezos took over. Otherwise, we were probably going to be going through the same headaches that Mr. Christopher Smalls did, and his hard-won victory over at Amazon. Um, the way I look at it, Bezos is extremely hands-off. So he doesn't really touch our editorial coverage at all. He does color it in terms of perception. Because everyone I talk to, you even have Glenn Greenwald saying, Bezos is expending personal money to do this, and it's like, no, man, like the money's from advertisers and subscribers, dude. Like we're still in business,
Right. Like the sum was from the purchase, and then from then on out, you guys were doing business.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. He injected $50 million after the purchase to do a hiring spree, and a lot of that hiring was on the technology side, to spruce up our website. So a lot of people, the things a lot of people don't know is that that Bezos's investment was mostly in the technology side. Our website was super slow. Our apps barely didn't work, and they still don't work fucking great anyways, I think. But like they work a lot better than they did before. There's a lot more connectivity. The ads display a lot faster. Like little shit like that where like a newspaper like didn't really care about. Like he was able to bring in folks from Amazon or hire folks away from Silicon Valley to come in to help us with the technology side, to help with our video streamers. And also to hire folks like me to help with the social media and to modernize our digital voice. So a lot of it came from that, and it doesn't really bother me in the sense that I know that he doesn't that he only shows up he's only shown up to the office like once a year, and it's only for like the annual meeting or whatever. And then like he might sit in for like an editorial meeting, but just to, like he just likes to like hear ideas, and then like just listen or whatever, and that's about it.
And then shoot himself off into space.
Yeah, and then go play with mechs and party with Leo DiCaprio and pose and like be a rich dude, like,
yeah,
like,
I give these guys like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, some of these other guys, like I give them some credit, Bill Gates, because if I sniffed 1/1000th of that amount of money, I would be gone off the off from society like that. So the fact that they they want to like give back and do it. I appreciate the that.
Mm.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you as we begin to wrap up, I want to be mindful of your time, is I really liked this piece you wrote called "The Success of Elden Ring Had Nothing to Do with the Pandemic."
Yeah,
And this
it
was a
does.
reaction to a New York Times article. Your guy, what I
Hmm.
would say was probably your rival newspaper. But
Hmm.
I look at this as a form of peer review in journalism that's essential. And
Hmm.
I feel like it doesn't happen enough. Even we brought up Nathan Grace, and I invited Nathan onto the show last year, and he said, no, I don't necessarily blame him. He doesn't like me. I also don't think it would necessarily go very well for him. But um, nonetheless, I feel like we have to have adversarial conversations and then everything in between, right? So we can have the conversations like the old, Gore Vidal, William Buckley debates or whatever, and then which
Hmm.
were awesome and
Hmm.
super fun to watch and informative. And then you could
Hmm.
have the more polite discourse where we don't really disagree and we're trying to just get some things on the table like you and I are doing now. I felt like this was really nice to see because it
Hmm.
checked your primary competitor and the way they cover it. I was surprised that New York Times article got by the goalie. And then when you kind of think about what you explained, which is that no one really knows what the fuck is going on in some of these places, um, you realize how this happened. So first of all, I wanted to, applaud that piece and compliment you on
Thank
it, but
you.
also say, do you think that that is a key component to say, like, let's see what the others are doing and check it when we can to make it better? Because I feel like people are playing too nice with each other at these various outlets. And it wasn't always like that, as you know, in the history of newspapers and magazines. It was not quite as cuddly as I feel like it is now. So I'm curious what you think about that particular aspect.
Look, I'm 40 years old. I came from the era of Sega. Just Sega does what Nintendo don't or whatever
Right.
like that. So like when I saw an opportunity to take a stab at the New York Times, I took it. Like I debated it for a while because I have a lot of friends and people I respect at the New York Times too, including the writer Brian Chen. I have a lot of respect for him too. But I do saw it as a good opportunity to kind of like quote unquote punch up. I don't know if it's punching up or punching laterally or whatever.
Right.
But I do think that instead of snarking about it on Twitter, I decided, like the New York Times actually cares about what the Washington Post writes about, just as the Washington Post cares about what the New York Times writes about. So I saw it as a good opportunity to kind of check the New York Times, especially if they're if they're going to try to waddle into the games journalism space. And I may be new into this, but I'm not new to gaming. I went to E3 back in 2002, so I've been within the orbit of games journalism for decades now, and I may not be the sharpest or most knowledgeable mind in this space, but I do know I do know games, and I do know what makes a game successful, and I don't like when the New York Times, like for example, that piece was about Elden Ring not finding success outside of the pandemic, which is a stupid thing to say. They also had a piece last year about how screen time was going up, and they were equating screen time to video game time. You always hear fucking people talking about like, oh, the 1,000 mile stare when people are playing games. Look at their dead eyes when they're playing video games. It's like, do you even say that to people who are reading a really good book?
Right.
Like you're just staring at a piece of paper, and then you're just staring at it the whole time, and you have dead eyes, right? No one says that about someone reading a book, but they say that about playing a game. It's like, no,
That's
we're not
well said.
just like fucking like staring at a screen and not thinking. We're engaging. We're problem solving. We're processing new information. We're figuring out the themes of the story, whatever that could be. So to equate screen time with just the gaming was just stupid, and it was their health reporter that made this leap in assumption, and I wanted to check that too. I do see us, and I did see me as taking a good opportunity to kind of check mainstream coverage of games, because it's always been embarrassing for a very very long time, and I think what the Washington Post could do and what I could do is kind of be a check on that. Um,
Yeah, well, it's really well said. And health reporters have beclowned themselves now for 2 years straight. So that they would that
yeah.
they would that they would do that with video games, I suppose, is no surprise. I totally agree with you. It actually, as a 37-year-old man, it annoys the shit out of me that some people that I think in my life are so smart, so able, so interested in things, you just can't get them to understand what video games are. Like no matter what I try to do. I'm like, no, I make them. Like I literally I own a developer. Like, do you want to try this game? Like, and they're like, no, I don't. I like, you hear like I played Galaga back in the day or something. I'm like, all right, whatever. I think that is an important piece, is to get the people to see it more respectfully, and see it for what it is, which I think is a wonderful form of art, entertainment, and all the rest. And anyone that's trying to pull in that direction is a friend of mine, because I think that is the key component to get people to see it. We've been, ever since, Ebert said the shit about games not being art, people have been obsessed with this argument. And I'm like, that's not even the argument, because I think it's objectively true that it is art. So now you just have to move on and say, like, this man that knew a lot about some other thing was wrong. And let's try to like figure it out for ourselves. And I think that the nascent nature of games coverage will allow for people to find different ways, but hopefully conversations like this will continue to leverage the ability of people like you and me to come together and talk about games in an instructive way. And I want to invite you back whenever you want to come back. You're more than welcome. But people that I've really enjoyed interviewing, I'm trying to invite them back to talk about games. So I'll definitely be in touch with you to maybe come back for a spoiler cast or a review discussion in the future, because
if you want to talk about games, but I haven't been playing much, but yeah, I'm happy to talk about games whenever.
Yeah, like whenever what you're playing matches up with what we're doing, we're definitely trying to get more and more people in, and we play games very slowly. We have, to your point earlier about creators taking money from the industry, a lot do. We have a strict no. We don't deal with PR. We don't take early games. We don't do no endemic advertising, and most PR people hate us. Sony PR hates us. But that's too bad, because our PlayStation podcast is the biggest.
I'm a big fan of one of your cohorts, Mr. Manny Plays. I didn't even understand that he was part of Last Stand Media until you reached out to me, and then I started watching more of your podcast, and I was like, oh shit, no shit, it's Mr. Manny Plays. I didn't know he was doing the Xbox Duke podcast or the Xbox lens of this.
Duke. Yeah, it's he's great. I love Matty.
Yeah, and he recently did a video review on Star Wars Force Unleashed, which I watched, and he went to great lengths to talk about how he doesn't take sponsorship money, but he was like, hey, Force Unleashed, I like the game, and it's an old ass game, so it's like, should I just take this? And everyone's like, yeah, sure, why not? And it's like, yeah, you should, man. It's fucking Star Wars Force Unleashed. No one cares, dude.
Yeah, exactly. That's like pre-Disney Star Wars, and
it's pre-Disney Star Wars. No one, like, it's not even Disney money. It's barely Disney money at this point, So
right, and yeah, I will. He'll be glad to hear that. I think he does great work over there, so it's really nice of you to say.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of him. So.
Thank you. And Gene, thank you for your time. I know, again, I'm sorry to hear about your long COVID suffering, but I hope that it clears up for you soon, and that you're back to normal. And can you let people know where they can find you if they want to follow you on Twitter or anything like that?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm just at Gene Park at Twitter. That's really the only social media platform I use. I used to stream on Twitch, but I'm just too tired these days. And you can just find me on WashingtonPost.com/people/Gene Park, I guess. Or just Google me and you'll find me, or some professor at Loyola Marymount who does economics or whatever, has the same name as me, but that's about it though.
Right.
I'm still trying to get my SEO up. So.
Yeah, well, this will help hopefully, and
hopefully.
Right. Well, Gene, thank you for your time. I appreciate you, and thank you all out there for your time, your love, your support of Last Stand, and all things on Patreon that we do.
And thanks again, Colin, for letting me talk to you and letting me talk to your audience. I hope they enjoyed it.
I think that they will have. So you're very welcome, and we'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show was conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.